Faithfully delivering value, interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Club. Today we're discussing The American Truth by Joseph Stiglitz, the 2001 Nobel Prize winner in economics. Stiglitz earned his PhD in economics from MIT and became a Yale economics professor at just 26. From 1993 to 1997, Stiglitz began his political career as a member of President Clinton's Council of Economic Advisers, later becoming its chairman. Between 1997 and 1999, he served as senior vice president and chief economist at the World Bank. In 2001, at the age of 58, Stiglitz shared the Nobel Economics Prize with two other economists for their work on information asymmetry theory.
The prize!
Over the next 2 decades, Stiglitz authored multiple academic works while regularly appearing at global economic forums. He's advised governments worldwide, with China being a frequent destination. His earlier books like Globalization and Its Discontents and The Price of Inequality were translated into Chinese to critical acclaim. After its 1919 U.S. publication, The American Truth was promptly brought to China. Its Chinese edition topped Deng Deng's economics bestseller list immediately upon June 2020 release. In this book, Stiglitz examines America's political and economic challenges while proposing reforms. As an economist, he addresses politics because he believes an economy's success depends on rules set by its leaders. His vision is to rebuild America's political and economic systems. The book's framework first diagnoses current problems, then charts America's future path. I'll now explore this book in 3 sections. First, the truth about American democratic elections. Second, the reality of America's separation of powers. Third, the shattering of the American dream. The truth. First, let's examine American democratic elections.
A key feature is the presidential election every 4 years, the centerpiece of American democracy.
Meanwhile, biannual congressional elections are equally crucial, like a minor exam every 2 years and a major one every 4. For example, 2020 featured both presidential elections nationwide and congressional races in every state. When only congressional elections occur, like in 2018, it's termed midterm elections. Each state elects 2 senators totaling 100 across 50 states, with 6-year terms. 1/3 of Senate seats are contested every 2 years. House seats are allocated by population, with even the smallest state guaranteed 1 representative serving 2-year terms without term limits. The author argues America's one-person, one-vote democracy has devolved into $1, 1 vote. Or
Election costs for president, senators, and representatives surge cycle after cycle. Both 2012 and 2016 set records as the most expensive ever.
the recently concluded 2020 election smashed spending records again, exceeding $14 billion total, more than double 2016's cost. Stiglitz traces this spending spiral to a landmark 2010 Supreme Court ruling, a watershed moment in U.S. electoral history. Before 2010, donations to political action committees by individuals and corporations had strict caps. Political action committees, PACs, are fundraising groups established by wealthy individuals, companies, or interest groups that indirectly support candidates through media campaigns rather than direct donations. For instance, they run ads promoting favored candidates or attacking opponents across media platforms. Since 2010, a new entity emerged: super PACs, essentially turbocharged versions of traditional PACs. That same year, the Supreme Court's ruling allowed unlimited corporate, nonprofit, and union donations to these committees. Later, individual donation caps to such committees were also eliminated. The author contends this ruling severely damaged U.S. democracy, enabling wealthy elites and corporations to flood super PACs with massive funds. Supporting campaigns, whoever has more money wields a bigger advertising push.
And the influence of massive advertising campaigns on election outcomes is growing.
Without enough funds, candidates get less exposure, and their ability to rally votes suffers big time. Actually, $1 one vote is just a figurative way of putting it.
Candidates often spend way more than $1 per vote to compete for ballots, especially in swing states.
To persuade key voters who are a small demographic, both Democrats and Republicans splash out on ads.
So, how can we dilute money's influence on elections?
First, Stiglitz wants to overturn the Supreme Court's 2010 ruling and reimpose strict limits on political donations.
Second, he thinks we should boost voter turnout. From recent presidential elections, voter turnout has hovered around 50%. In the 2016 presidential election, turnout was under 56%.
In contrast, Belgium's voter turnout during the same period was 87%.
In Sweden's elections, voter turnout was 83%.
Low turnout means candidates can win by appealing to just a small fraction of voters, which indirectly makes elections easier to sway with money.
For instance, in the 2016 election, Trump had over 40% support among those who voted.
Factoring in turnout, he actually won support from only about 20% of eligible voters. To increase U.S. turnout, the author suggests moving Election Day to Sunday.
Currently, U.S. presidential elections are held on a Tuesday in November. This is inconvenient for workers and students. Additionally, he recommends rewarding voters with incentives like in Australia.
And fining those who don't vote. Australia is one of the few countries with compulsory voting, maintaining turnout above 90%.
The author strongly advocates this approach because higher turnout ensures elected presidents truly represent the majority, making elections less vulnerable to money manipulation. All right, that wraps up part 1. Money's corruption isn't limited to elections. It has seeped into every corner of the U.S. political system. Next, we enter part 2 to examine the truth about America's separation of powers. The author argues this checks and balances system has devolved into partisan warfare riddled with power-money exchanges. Since its founding, America established a separation of powers among the President, Congress, and Supreme Court. The original intent was mutual oversight. But with the two-party system, Republican-Democrat rivalry has not only weakened oversight, but weaponized the separation of powers. For instance, a Republican president with GOP majorities in both House and Senate faces minimal oversight, passing bills effortlessly. With a Supreme Court majority appointed by Republican presidents, that president gains formidable advantage. But if either chamber has a Democratic majority, that Republican president becomes a lame duck leader. Pushing legislation then becomes extremely difficult because many bills require passage in both chambers to become law.
His proposals typically get blocked in whichever chamber Democrats control.
Take Trump. Initially, with GOP-controlled Congress, he passed his tax cut bill smoothly.
After Democrats regained the House in 2018 midterms, Trump's troubles began.
The House then actively opposed him at every turn, even pursuing impeachment.
Congress has become a partisan weapon, and the Supreme Court is now entangled in this political warfare.
The 9 Supreme Court justices generally split into 2 factions.
Republican-appointed justices are conservatives.
They hold conservative positions on issues like abortion, gun control, and LGBTQ+ rights, aligning with Republican ideology.
Democratic-appointed justices are liberals, frequently opposing conservatives on major issues. For example, conservatives oppose gun control, while liberals support it. Currently, with more Republican-appointed justices, the author believes the Supreme Court is controlled by the GOP.
In the 2000 presidential election, Bush and Gore disputed vote counts, taking the case to the Supreme Court.
The court ruled in Bush's favor. Since Bush was also Republican, Stiglitz considers the ruling unjust.
He suggests Democrats propose an amendment limiting justice terms from lifetime to 20 years when next in power.
Before such amendment takes effect, increasing the number of justices would be a temporary measure. Beyond the partisan power struggles, government and Congress have become hubs for power-money exchanges. Washington's K Street is known as Lobbyist Row. It's packed with think tanks, lobbying groups, and PR firms targeting Congress members and officials. Lobbying isn't just talk, it requires serious investment.
For example, oil companies spend heavily to access officials, securing huge government lands at low cost.
They've often confirmed rich oil or mineral deposits beneath these lands, paying fees disproportionate to the resources gained. Similarly, pharmaceutical lobbyists sway Congress, costing the U.S. government billions extra annually in drug purchases. Both oil and pharma companies are major donors behind politicians and presidents. As mentioned earlier, no candidate wins presidential or congressional races without donor backing. Once elected, they naturally repay their benefactors.
So post-election becomes payback time for these donors.
Officials also trade power for money through the revolving door. This refers to politicians landing lucrative private sector jobs after office, a subtler form of power money exchange. Some politicians quickly join Wall Street after leaving government. This inevitably raises suspicions. They served Wall Street while in office.
The revolving door is everywhere, even penetrating the military.
Some generals and senior officers seamlessly transitioned to defense contractors after leaving the military. The government has implemented numerous measures to restrict the revolving door, with limited success, as many politicians exploit loopholes. Though regulations impose cooling-off periods of a year or more for senior officials after retirement, there are always ways around the rules. Some politicians avoid direct employment by instead advising corporate colleagues for indirect compensation. The author doesn't actually offer concrete solutions for closing the revolving door. He believes fundamental change requires systemic reforms and cultural shifts, because in today's America, it's become the norm in official circles. Everyone does it. If you don't play along, you're a fool. It's hard for anyone in this system to stay clean. As long as this culture persists, refusing to engage in power money deals risks social exclusion. All right, that concludes part 2. In America, checks and balances have mutated into partisan battles, with government and Congress corrupted by money, serving only the top tier. For most lower-class Americans, achieving the American dream has become a pipe dream. Now let's enter part 3 to examine the shattered truth of the American dream. The American dream promises that anyone, regardless of background, can achieve their ideals and live happily through hard work. Historically an immigrant nation, America used the dream to attract Europeans. After W1 and W2O, as America grew powerful, the dream was largely realized. The middle class reached about 70% of the population.
But in recent decades, the middle class has shrunk, making the dream a reality for only a few.
This is an independent polling organization.
Pew Research Center data shows that over 40 years, 1974 to 2014, incomes for 90% of Americans stagnated, while the top 1% saw income surge 200 to 300%, creating a vast chasm.
For example, as of January 2018 data, Amazon's Jeff Bezos, Microsoft's Bill Gates, and Berkshire Hathaway's Warren Buffett, these 3 wealthiest Americans held more wealth than the entire bottom half of the population combined. We've heard stories of wealthy Americans pledging fortunes to charity, but not every tycoon does this. Many pass massive wealth to heirs. Despite high estate taxes, generational wealth transfers directly perpetuate advantage. Thus, family advantages get passed down through generations. The author cites 2 dynasties. The Waltons, whose wealth nearly $175 billion in 2018,
Their Walmart chain, founded in 1962, now operates over 10,000 stores across 27 countries.
The other is the Koch family, American industrial giants.
Their privately held company was estimated at $120 billion wealth in 2018.
Both families are major Republican donors, representing a hereditary elite that increasingly dominates America. In the U.S., nearly 1 in 5 children grows up in poverty. Professor Stiglitz often tells students, the most crucial life decision is choosing the right parents, essentially like breeds like. A small minority do rise from poverty to elite status, but it's a rare occurrence. As social stratification solidifies, upward mobility becomes increasingly difficult for the poor. Being born wealthy in a privileged neighborhood is now the strongest predictor of success in America. Harvard's Opportunity Insights project shows 90% of children born in 1940 out-earned their parents. But as the American dream declined, so did this probability. Recent data shows only 50% of children now out-earn their parents. Equal opportunity has vanished. In school, a kid from the upper class, even if they have bad grades, is way more likely to have better opportunities than top students from poor families. Stiglitz has been pondering, how did America end up like this? In the years right after 281, every class in America was booming, and later, the income growth for the lower class even outpaced the upper class. That era, when most people could live the American dream and enjoy middle-class life, is something the author still misses deeply. The author thinks deindustrialization is why so many lower-class Americans can't achieve the American dream and even lose their jobs. When talking about deindustrialization, we gotta mention Stiglitz's hometown, Gary. It's a prime example of America's deindustrialization and part of the Rust Belt. The Rust Belt refers to the traditional heavy industrial areas around the Great Lakes in the U.S. This area includes Cleveland, where oil tycoon Rockefeller rose in the late 19th century, and Pittsburgh, home to steel magnate Carnegie. But during deindustrialization, these regions saw mass unemployment, factories left empty, and machines rusting away. That's how the Rust Belt got its name. The backdrop of American deindustrialization is manufacturing globalization. Companies move factories overseas because cheap labor means bigger profits. Overall, America benefited from globalization, but the rewards weren't shared with everyone. Low-skilled workers didn't just miss out on globalization's gains, they also got hit hard by job losses. Meanwhile, high-tech advances, especially AI, have replaced some American jobs too. From 1965 to 1994, nearly 30 years, the share of U.S. workers in manufacturing dropped from a peak of 28% down to just 16%. Plus, the author believes Republican policies worsened the shattering of the American dream. Republican economic policies follow liberal theory. They push tax cuts to grow the economy, claiming that when the pie gets bigger, wealth trickles down from the rich to regular folks. So, the so-called trickle-down effect. Trickle like a small stream, down like falling drops. It refers to wealthy people increasing consumption and investment after getting richer, supposedly raising poor people's incomes. But trickle-down never happened. The rich got richer while their wealth never trickled to the poor. The poor often stay stuck, or even worse off. Evidence shows tax cuts only provide short-term stimulus. Long-term, they balloon deficits and slow growth. This actually pushes the poor further from their American dream. The author argues reclaiming the dream requires switching to Keynesian economic policies. Keynesianism stresses government's role in boosting aggregate demand to ensure employment, since job levels depend on total demand. But his solution: tax the wealthy heavily to fund expanded social welfare, ensuring dignified living standards. For example, government-led infrastructure projects could reduce unemployment. He opposes Trump's "bring manufacturing back" approach, arguing it's unwise to disrupt efficient global supply chains. Forcing this would hurt U.S. corporate competitiveness. Then what happens to unemployed workers? His reform government launched mega projects like high-speed rail to absorb massive labor. He also proposes affordable student loans. Only 1/3 of Americans have higher education. Many take commercial loans, saddling themselves with unpayable debt. By 2018, this debt exceeded $1.05, with some needing decades to repay. President Obama himself took 21 years, until age 43, to pay off his loans. He suggests converting commercial loans to public ones with favorable rates. Finally, he calls for stronger regulation of big corporations and banks. Because he argues that the growing market power of major U.S. corporations necessitates strong measures to strictly regulate mergers and prevent unfair competition. Previously, America often believed unregulated markets were the only solution to all problems. The author believes society functions well only when balancing individual and collective interests. Currently, American society overemphasizes individualistic values. In our interdependent society, oversight and regulation must exist. The 2008 financial crisis was a major lesson. It was largely caused by inadequate government oversight of financial institutions. In 2010, the U.S. passed the Dodd-Frank Act to regulate financial institutions.
But it proved ineffective, as banks relentlessly lobbied Congress and the White House, diluting its power. Trump later gutted it further.
In the author's words, post-2018, regulators returned to pre-crisis complacency toward most banks. That concludes Part 3. The book's English subtitle is Progressive Capitalism in an Age of Discontent. To the author, his solutions embody progressive capitalism, with government at its core.
But giving government a central role in America's market economy faces significant resistance.
Implementing such government-centered policies faces massive obstacles in the U.S. While not explicitly claiming party affiliation, Stiglitz's fierce criticism of Republican administrations reveals clear political leanings. The 2020 U.S. presidential election has concluded. While the outcome likely pleased him, will Biden truly mend the shattered American dream for the masses and end money power deals in Congress? Peking University professor Justin Yifu Lin, the author's longtime friend, co-hosted a live stream with him to promote this book. Lin views Stiglitz as an intellectual bearing global responsibility. His prescriptions are spot on but difficult to implement, because no matter which party's politician gets elected, they end up serving the wealthy elite, making it tough to solve real structural problems. All right, that concludes our discussion of the American truth. Reading notes are below the audio. See you next time.